Hi everyone, I'm Heath Hightower, co-host of Process Recordings. Before we get started with today's show, I want to just give you a quick reminder. While Lisa and I hope you find our show useful, we also want you to know that it's not a substitute for therapy. If you do need a therapist, however, we do recommend that you check out the psychologytoday.com website. Also, if you need immediate support, contact 988, which is the 3-digit number to contact the National Crisis Hotline and Suicide number. Thanks for listening and watching, and enjoy the show. Hi everybody, I'm Heath Hightower.
And I'm Lisa Wessan.
And this is Process Recordings, the show where we have real talk about real human experiences, and we offer real advice and real solutions to help you better love, learn, work, and live.
Yes, yes.
And it's good to see you.
Yes, coming back now to the practical applications from part 1 of grief. We talked about definitions and distinctions between depression and grief and different kinds of grief. And today we're going to talk about how do you cope with grief? How do you move through it? How do you release and let go? How much time? We talked about last time also that the myth that it's 6 months or a year is ridiculous, So anyway, I'm excited. I mean, I'm a skills person. In my practice, I say I don't believe in willpower. I believe in skill power. It's like skills get you through. Just trying to force yourself, that's an ego thing. Doesn't work really. It's not sustainable anyway. You know?
Yeah, so I thought it would be helpful for us to have this conversation start by us just kind of talking about how do we think about the healing journey related to grief. Like, there are interventions that help people get to a particular place, but what's the place that we think we're trying to get people to?
Right. Well, I think, in my philosophy of life, in the least laboratory of life, if someone feels useful and peaceful, that is the foundation for a great life. There's all the search for happiness, all this, I'm not against happiness, but frankly, when you feel useful and you have a place in the world and you feel like you're being utilized and you feel peaceful, then it leads to joy and happiness organically, instead of like trying to clutch out there and get happiness, So I believe finding ways to feel useful. Now, when people are grieving, you don't tell them, when a widow is grieving her husband, you don't tell her right away, go volunteer at the Botanical Garden. You don't say that, obviously.
Right.
But ultimately, maybe after 6 months or a year, how can she feel useful? How can she find meaning?
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Like, we need to find meaning, even in the death. So that's my take on it. And learning to cope with it and allow yourself to move through it, to find meaning and then purpose in life again gives you joy.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that I think about it is I think about it as an integration process, right? I think when we hear phrases like move on, I think the meta communication in that is you need to forget this person. You need to forget that you had a relationship with them. You need to forget that they were ever alive. That's the meta. It may not be what we are intending when we say that.
Right.
But I think when we say things like, I think it's time for you to move on, what that really typically means is the person who's saying that, they're uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
They are uncomfortable with your discomfort. They are uncomfortable with your grief. So I think that the realistic expectation and goal isn't that you're going to forget the person. And why would you want to?
No.
You loved this person. The reason why you're grieving so hard is because you loved so hard, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so I think about the process as an integration process. So when I'm thinking about interventions, I'm thinking about a way in which I can help teach a person or help a person figure out how they can hold their grief and walk at the same time forward, right? So that's the image in my head that guides my practice.
I like that. And I agree. And I remind people too, when they start saying, when am I going to get over this? I can't get over this. And, Queen Elizabeth II, when she lost her beloved Philip, said this best. My favorite quote on grief, which is 8 words, is grief is the price we pay for love.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Like when you really have a wonderful relationship with someone, you're going to suffer. There's no escape.
Right.
And even as we go forward now, I always feel like with my dearest friends, with my family, like I'm preparing myself. Like my parents are elderly. They're getting on. I mean, I love them. My brother I adore, and we are all impermanent.
Yes.
So I have to embrace the fact that the more I love, and I recently lost my dear sister, Amy, my youngest sister, and I think of her every day. I talk with her in my mind every day because I love when you love someone so much. So giving people permission to feel okay talking to the dead relative. I have a list of books I recommend that they should read concerning ways to communicate with your loved one without feeling like you're going crazy, because some people feel shame, like, oh, I'm talking to my husband, I'm talking to my sister, but no, it's actually healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's a really important intervention, right? So I think intervention number 1 and 2 is give yourself permission. That's the first intervention. Intervention number 2 really is give yourself permission to express your grief in some way, whether that's communicating directly with the person. Sometimes that means going to a grave site. So for religious traditions where there is a grave site, a physical space where you can go to be where where your loved one was laid to rest. Sometimes we don't have those things. Sometimes if you're cremated and weren't buried, maybe you have an urn of ashes. Maybe you've got a picture album of the person that you go to, and maybe the expression is not verbal. It's really in your mind. You're having a conversation with them.
Yeah, another useful process that I do with people who've had a loss is I have them write a letter to the person. Obviously, they're not going to mail it, but they write a letter, and in the letter they write the feelings of love and whatever, and then also maybe some misgivings or apologies, any unfinished business, anything that they just wish I'd said this, wish I said that. Yeah. And I say to them in my belief system, in spirit, they can connect and they're going to hear it. So they write this letter to the person, and then they bring it back the next week to therapy and they read it. Yeah. And they have a release when they write the letter, and then they have a release when they read it to me. And there's often, it's really, really powerful. It's good, and they feel better, and I'm witnessing. Yeah. Especially if there's apologies or amends going on, it's very powerful. Yeah. And so those letters to the loved ones, and also the anger even. I've had people read me the letters where they're furious. Yeah. Like, a husband, turns out he took $50,000 out of the IRA, didn't tell them. Actually they find out these things and like they're furious. Sure. So it all goes in these letters, and then they read it and they release it, and they do feel better.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is really important. And this is something that I spend a lot of time with clients, is helping my clients develop a balanced biography of the person.
I like that term.
And a balanced biography is a recognition that we are all human. None of us were saints, but there is a tendency that when we've lost someone, that we begin to revise their biography and we begin to idealize them and only focus on all of the wonderful things about them, which then can set us up to feel bad because we now are starting to compare how we treated them with only the idealized ways that they treated us, forgetting all of the awful things they may have done or said to us. And so I think this whole idea of developing a balanced biography is really important, because it can be harder to integrate a loss if you're only integrating the best parts of the person and not having a more accurate appraisal of your relationship with the person.
Yes. I like that, balancing the biography. That's a great term. Yeah. And also, it takes us off the hook. Like, I like to think that each one of us is doing the best we can. And sometimes we're failing forward. We make mistakes, and to have permission to remember the person was whole, good and bad. It's very dialectic, and they had some ugly parts. We all have ugly shadow
Absolutely.
Stuff, whatever,
Yeah.
because that makes it easier to feel less guilty about I wasn't good enough or I wasn't as good as them,
Yeah.
just saying.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I also think is really important to say about the grief integration process is that it is iterative and will change over time. So I really like your idea of the letter writing, but I would recommend writing the letter shortly after the person has died, then 6 months later, and compare the letters just to see kind of what are you noticing about your shift.
Interesting.
And then writing again at a year. Because what I've learned over time is grief is not a totally forward process. It's ebbs and flows. It's 2 steps forward, sometimes 3 steps back. And it is that back and forth motion over time that gets us to the place that you were talking about, that place of meaning making. And that really is what meaning making is. It is the process of taking our experiences, looking at them openly and honestly, and then ascribing significance and value to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the hard part, there's probably a clinical term for this, but it's not coming to my mind, is when someone dies inappropriately, like when someone's young, whether it's a child or a 60-year-old woman.
Sure.
Again, like my sister Amy, she was only 61,
Right.
and it was very difficult. And like the rage that comes up. And now if someone's an atheist, I'm curious what atheists do. If there's no deity to yell at.
Sure.
But those of us that have a connection with the energy or the intention of the universe, which God, good orderly direction.
Sure.
I was furious.
Sure.
I was like railing at God and saying, what the hell is going on here? There are people in these prisons who are withering away in their 80s, and my sister took it 61. I had to get over that. I was like, furious.
Sure.
And I every so often I relapse back into that. I cannot get over that she's dead. It's like, and she was so healthy. Anyway, point is, that rage, and that's something to deal with also, that it's unfair, and if someone is religious or spiritual, it kind of like just, it's really hard to grasp. I know the idea that everything that's happening to us is happening for us, but when a loved one is taken too early, it's not easy. It's brutal. There's no meaning in that. It just it seems ridiculous.
Yeah,
and it challenges my belief system. Yeah,
sure. And I think that part of the work that we usually do with people is we help them take a look at their belief systems.
Yes.
Right. And so what you're talking about is having an expectation that there is order, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That things happen in order. And so again, part of the grief work would be looking at that expectation. Where does that come from? How does it serve you? How does it maybe get in your way of healing? I think one of the things that you've said on other shows, and certainly something that I believe, is that the point of living through grief is not to stay in the grief, right? In the same way that the reason for living is not to stay in the shame. We've talked about that on a prior episode. The reason for living and deciding to go to therapy is so that you can figure out how to integrate shame into your life, how to integrate grief into your life. And part of that might be looking at those expectations that you have.
Absolutely.
There is a branch of psychology that is really focused on expectations and how unrealistic expectations can set us up for feeling really crappy. And so I think what I would do as part of the grief work is, what did people expect about life? What did people expect about their relationship with the person that they've lost, or the pet that they've lost, or the place that they've lost?
Yes. You're reminding me of a favorite professor from graduate school. She used to say that your expectations are inversely proportional to your happiness.
Yes. The more expectations you have, the worse off you'll be.
Yes.
Yes.
And it was a gentle reminder that, like, if you expect a patient to be when I was working in the hospital, like such and such a way, we tried it's ideal to have no expectations, just show up with an open mind.
Sure.
And like, I'm the eldest of 3 children. So I kind of thought that I would go first,
Sure.
My brother thought my brother had some surgery a while ago, and he thought he was going to go first,
Sure.
And we all had expectations. And then you're right, the expectations make you crazy or depressed or weird.
Sure.
So it's true. With the less expectations, you can release your expectations, because the world is full of random, chaotic things. That's a mystery. It's a mystery. The best I can do is I have a file in my brain that's called the I don't know folder. And when I think about my sister, I just put it in the I don't know folder. It's a great mystery. Why my sister was taken so young, I have no idea. And I really let it go now. At this point, I've let it go.
Right. Yeah. And, again, I think that the important thing to emphasize here is that it is a gentle exploration of expectations. And I always tell the people that I work with is that expectations is just a fancy word for rules. So what are the rules? What are the rules that you have about life and death? What do you have? What rules are rules that you inherited? Because a lot of the rules we get are taught to us by our religious traditions, our cultural traditions, our family systems. And let's take a look at those rules. Do those rules hold up now?
That's right.
Or maybe we need to reinvent new rules, right? And again, part of the grief process may in fact be creating new expectations about yourself, other people, life, and death as a way to heal.
I like that. New rules.
Yeah, new rules. Yeah, a new rule book. Because you are, in fact, now living in a new life. But I do think that it is this kind of constant balancing act of certainly working on ourselves to move towards a life that we want to live. And it is also, how do we also recreate a different connection to the person, pet, place, or thing that we've lost? And that is important. That's an important part of the process. So just some examples from my work with people is, so for instance, if you don't particularly have a religious tradition, oftentimes I've had families build a park bench. They've gotten permission from the city to build a park bench.
Love that.
And it's a place where they can sit. It's by a tree. They can go and reflect there. Sometimes people have anniversary parties where they get together and they reminisce and tell funny stories and sad stories and jealous stories. And just as a way of keeping the person alive, but alive in a full way.
I like that.
In a balanced way.
Yes, celebrating.
Yeah.
Continue to celebrate the person.
Yeah. I think the other thing to also think about is that sometimes we have really complicated grief experiences. Like we lose someone we hated.
Yes.
And yet we're still feeling like we're grieving, right? And so I think it is important for us to also acknowledge, how do we help folks who don't have a lot of love in their heart for the person that they've lost, and at the same time, they are experiencing the pain that comes with grief.
So to me, that enters the world of learning how to detach with kindness or respect, if not love, and learning to detach for your own health, because the last thing you want is to have someone in your head, living in your head rent-free, driving you crazy. From the grave is even worse, So getting those people out of our heads is very important. And detaching with love, that's it's a big topic. We could do a show on detachment.
Okay.
Anyway, so for me, I know detachment can be saying the words out loud, that, I'm okay. As I am today, I'm good enough. I'm okay. I don't have to be a saint. I can have mixed emotions. And I teach dialectical behavior therapy, and in dialectic work, we learn to say, I love this person, and I also detest them, and it's okay. Yeah. And I'm okay that I don't like this person. And learning, and making through psychoeducation and validation and process that it's okay to hate and love. It happens in and even the healthiest marriages sometimes.
Yes.
So that's for some people, it's a revelation. How could you hate someone and love them? Yes, you can. And it's okay. And you're normal. You're not having a nervous breakdown or mental meltdown,
Yeah. I think another strategy that I often use, both myself as well as when I work with people who are grieving, really has to do with, all right, this person that I don't have very positive feelings for, what can this loss teach me about myself? What does it teach me about what I need and what I want from other relationships that I have? Because I'm feeling these really strong things for this person that was a negative force in my life. What can my relationship with them teach me about what I need now and what I need going forward in order to be at a better place, however I define that?
Yes, it can be a useful springboard for new living. And so let's, not to change the subject, but let's go into some disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss, because those are the tough ones. So, and especially, I in my practice, I have some people who are going through trans process. And that is a very complicated situation when the family doesn't accept it. And the disenfranchised grief, there's joy and having the surgery and finishing all the hormone treatment and having the surgery, whatever. It's fantastic. And yet it's brutal when the family, gives them a hard time. And so, what do you think about, what are some tools for disenfranchised grief?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about in disenfranchised grief, so with disenfranchised grief, there is no socially or culturally acceptable space, both physical space and relational space, for you to have those experiences of grief.
Or it's being judged and validated.
Right, exactly. So I think one of the things that I would start with, because I think this is where we all start, is how do we create good enough safety for you?
Interesting.
Right? So if you think about, if we thought about this from a Maslow's hierarchy of needs perspective, so when you are having a disenfranchised grief, or really any sort of complicated grief, you need to kind of do the checklist. Do I have my basic biological needs met right now? If you don't, those have got to get met first. So work on that.
Nutrition, exercise, sleep.
Exactly. Then safety. That is that my body is safe enough, my personhood is safe enough, my belongings are safe enough, where I'm living is safe enough.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I would start there. Then the next would be our love and belonging needs. So if your family, in the instance that you're giving, if your family is disenfranchising you because they want you to still be Amy when now you really identify as Alan, then you need to think about, well, how else am I going to get my love and belonging needs met? And maybe that is simply understanding the history of trans people in America, knowing that you are a part of a legacy of people who have been trans in the United States for a very long time. Maybe it's finding a trans support group, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's wonderful supports now. And I'm often—
virtual and in person.
I often say to people, with their difficult families, I would never tell someone to estrange. I don't really believe in estrangement, but I say, you don't go to the hardware store to get oranges. Like, don't even think about getting love or attention or comfort from these people. Don't even think about it. It's like, you don't, you know what I mean? Because you don't get oranges at the hardware store. You got to find your nurturing people and give it up, let go of the fantasy. There's always this fantasy they're going to accept me. No, they're not. At this point, no, they're not. Unless there's a major shift somehow, but usually, anyway, especially with the religious people and the fundamentalists. And, it's interesting when people start learning to find their nurturing, like, where can I get my nurturing? And the support groups are wonderful. I'm a fan of all groups.
So again, if you're not living in a region of the country where there are support groups, again, I would consider read biographies of trans folks, watch YouTube videos of people who have transitioned. Just start building a repertoire of other people who have been in similar situations to yours, so that you don't, at the very least, you don't want to feel isolated and alienated.
Right, and that goes for anybody, whether you're coming out, you're gay, or whether you
Same thing with grief of any
Yeah.
kind.
yeah. It's the loss of the family and the connections it's a disenfranchised grief that's very painful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, I always think about things in terms of turning them into their opposites. So if disenfranchised means the absence of something, then the opposite of that is the presence of something.
Yes.
And so the question then becomes, what is it that you need in your life presently? What is it that you need and want? Not who, but what. Because you don't have control over the who. You may not be able to convince your mom to love you the way that you want her to. But what you do need is you need love, you need respect, you need your dignity upheld. That's the need. Then the question becomes, okay, where can I get it?
Right. How do you get that build that into your life?
Yeah.
But the good news is that, it's a little corny, like seek and you shall find. But like when you look for something and you become aggressively focused on getting it, you will find it.
Right.
It's there.
Right.
And now again, in places like Boston, New York, Chicago, whatever, LA, there's an abundance of support groups for everything, whether you have lymphoma or trans or whatever it is, but in some remote parts, they have more trouble. But they have to go, they go online. They find it online, if not in person.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I also think the other important thing to say is it's important to build respite.
Yeah.
That grief is work, but it can't be 24/7 work. And so I actually, as an intervention, I have my clients schedule grief.
Yes.
And at first it seems odd, it seems absolutely weird. But if you practice scheduling it where you're going to set aside 15 minutes, 20 minutes at a time that is best for you, you're going to train your psyche to do the work when you want it to. What you can't do is ignore the grief work. The grief is going to happen whether you want it to or not.
Exactly.
The question is are you going to control the grief or is the grief going to control you? And I think if you start by scheduling times to do some sort of grief work, remembering work, expression work, writing work, exercise, collage, whatever.
I agree. In fact, when I was a young clinician, I was taught at Mount Sinai Hospital, my supervisor, to set aside 15 minutes a day at the end of the day to do some grief work, because I was working with geriatrics, and it was overwhelming. I was getting flooded with emotion. And you can't cry during sessions. It's very inappropriate to cry during a session. So I'd have to hold it all in, and I began to cry every day. I left time to do grief work. First, it felt very artificial, but then I really got into it. And sometimes I only cried for 5 minutes, but I'd think of a few of the people I saw that day, and I was like, oh my God. And then I'd let it go. And it became a good practice. And if you think you can't schedule grief work, that's a belief system. That's a cognitive distortion. You can put it in your calendar like a dentist appointment. And you put it in your calendar, you say, okay, it's 12:15 now. I'm going to grieve for 15 minutes. And it works.
Right. Or 5, just
five,
whatever.
Right, 5 minutes.
It can just start small and work up as you need to.
Yeah, and what's helpful when you're home, I recommend people take a picture of the person. If it's someone who passed away, put the picture in front or on your phone. Now everybody has pictures on their phone, and just look at it. That'll start the process. Go, how am I going to start to cry? It's easy to trigger. Yeah. So we're going to be wrapping up.
Thanks for this conversation.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure. I love this. That we're doing this podcast. It's enriching me, and I love learning and sharing some good tips with you. And I love your tips, and I like sharing my tips.
Yeah. Well, and I've really appreciated what you've brought today in terms of not only your personal experience as a clinician, but also your personal experience as a person. So
thank you.
I really want to acknowledge the courage that you're taking.
Yes, thank you very much. I take a risk. I've learned that life begins at the end of my comfort zone. Yeah. So I take little baby steps out every day. That's how I grow. So anyway, we are going to wrap. This is Process Recordings with Lisa Wessan and
Heath Hightower. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, nice being here. Good health is wealth. Go for it. You deserve to have the best mental, spiritual, physical, and sexual health. Go for it.
Process Recordings is produced by Lisa Wessan and Heath Hightower, with technical support from Chelmsford TeleMedia, the community media center of Chelmsford, Massachusetts.